Did you ever hear about the hero's journey? It's a narrative pattern that is used in a lot of stories. It's a narrative pattern where the hero embarks on a journey, faces many challenges, and comes back a changed man. And exactly this narrative pattern is used a lot in Hollywood and Disney movies to tell stories. Stories that are all linear. They have a beginning and they have an end. And that's great for watching movies, but not so great for really experiencing them. To feel being part of that movie, to feel being in control. And that's actually one of the reasons that Netflix decided to invest in the interactive genre. One of the releases they did was Bandersnatch. It's an interactive movie where you, as a viewer, can decide some of the challenges the main character in the story is going to do. It makes you feel a little bit more part of that story. It's more engaging, it's more interesting to watch. And there are multiple outcomes. Depending on the choices that you make as a viewer, the story will change. But what if you are not the viewer making these decisions? What if you would be the main character? That's what we're going to talk about today. In today's webinar, we are going to explain how you can use storytelling, interactive storytelling, where the main character feels being part of that story, where the main character can make those decisions, and all used in virtual reality. Hi, I'm Thijs de Vries, CEO at Warp VR, and together with Danny de Bruin, Chief Experience Officer at Warp VR, we are going to explore how you can use interactive storytelling for immersive learning applications. We will be discussing our latest worksheet and will explain how you can become a better story writer. So let's dive in immediately. Danny.
Hey Thijs, thanks for the great introduction, and I'm looking forward to talking about our new worksheet.
Same, absolutely. So to dive in the topic immediately, what is this worksheet and why is it important?
And so we learned that most users of Warp Studio are great in creating learning content, but mostly not in creating stories. They're not so experienced in writing stories. So that's why we created a worksheet, because we think story-based training is super powerful. And we also believe that everyone can learn to write good stories. Therefore, we built this worksheet. We created a worksheet to help you create and analyze story-based training, interactive, in a simple and effective way.
Cool. So with this worksheet, any instructional designer can start story writing for interactive, immersive learning scenarios.
Yeah, it's really made for the first phase. So it's to help you create the story outline before you get into Warp Studio and really go into the details.
Cool. So let's go into the worksheet. Can you tell a little bit more about the structure of the worksheet?
Yeah. So as you told, working with the scenario experts from Dutch Film Academy in Amsterdam, we learned that most stories, novels, plays are based on the 3-act structure. But the 3-act structure is created for linear stories and non-active stories. So what we did, we improved the 3-act structure with our more than 10 years experience creating VR scenarios to facilitate the interactive, story-based, immersive training scenarios we always talk about. Cool. So the 3-act structure divides a story outline in 3 different acts. You have the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. And this helps you as a story writer to write your story in an engaging and satisfying way for your audience.
Yeah, I can imagine this 3-act structure is also part of the hero's journey we started this webinar with.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can see multiple sheets here in this worksheet. Can you tell me a little bit on how you start working with this worksheet?
Yeah, so we have three different parts in this worksheet. And the first part is all about setting the scenario drivers. And this is about the topic, the learning goal, the target audience, but also about what business impact you hope to create with this scenario. So maybe it sounds a bit obvious, but it's really important to get these boundaries straight from the beginning before you write the story, because we also advise you to not write this story alone. Do this in a workshop form and invite others, maybe subject matter experts or other colleagues that could contribute to the story. And while working with others and having set clear boundaries, that really speeds up the process of creating a story.
Okay, so that's the first part of the worksheet. What about the second and third?
Yeah, so when you create the boundaries for the story in the first part, you go to the second part, and that's all about defining your story elements. So creating and thinking about the different elements you need to create this story, to build this story. And then in the third part, the story comes alive. So you place the elements in a specific order to really get the story outline.
Oh, I'm curious. So let's dive into the separate parts a little bit more. I'm curious what's in there and how people can actually start working with those. So that first part, set scenario drivers. I think you mentioned one of the drivers is kind of that business goal. Why the story in itself is important for the business. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you can have the most amazing story, but in the end, a training should also have a positive impact on the business. So this can be maybe cost savings or speed of training or the improving employee morale. So it can have a direct or indirect effect on the business impact. So while creating a VR scenario, I would say you should focus on improving the skills and abilities of the employees, but also contributing to the success of the business.
Yeah, so I can see that's really important from the early start of working with the worksheet to know about that business impact, what you want to achieve.
Yeah, and I also think it helps to get other stakeholders involved in your creating process.
Yeah, I can see that definitely. I think there are more elements to that first part, but I want to dive into the second part as well. So let's take a look there, which is more about the defining of the story elements. Can you talk us a little bit more through the second part of the worksheet?
Yeah, the second part is all about defining story elements. So that's about the characters in the story, the obstacles, and they really help. We wrote different questions and examples to help you come up with enough story elements to write your story. It's really you have enough inspiration if you need it, if you want to be inspired. So the first field is about the main character. So who is that person? Who do you play when you put on the VR headset? The second is what is the goal of the main character. So that really helps to get the story going, to get it moving, to create conflicts and obstacles. So this can, for example, can be to fix a deal, or maybe when you have a scenario about a fire, this can be go to your appointment. This is the first goal that you want to achieve as a player. The third field is about where this story takes place. So where are we when we put on the VR headset? Are there maybe other places where we go to in this story? And the last field of this sheet is about the other characters, which you can use to give information to the learner, but also to have them experience other characteristics or emotions through these different characters.
Yeah, so through the other characters.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there could be multiple other characters in a story, obviously.
Yeah, you can think of an angry manager, or maybe a client that walks in the store that really needs something. Or
yeah, I can see that. So you also mentioned obstacles already briefly. Can you share a little bit more about obstacles in a story?
Yeah, so we focus on that on the in the second part on the different sheet, and the top one is about obstacles. And a story isn't a story without obstacles. So the main character has a goal, but what prevents that person for reaching that goal? This can, and we see in interactive story-based scenarios, we mostly use external obstacles. So maybe a machine that broke down, maybe a fire that started, or a customer that's angry because something went wrong. So things that happens outside you as a person, and they are really needed to tell a compelling story. The second field is about outcomes. So of course it's an interactive story. So what happens? What are the outcomes of decisions made by this main character? So a successful outcome can be a happy customer. Maybe the customer buys something from you. And an unsuccessful outcome can be maybe the machine broke down, or maybe the fire gets worse, or something else that happens.
Super interesting. So with the variety in outcomes, so if you've got successful ones and unsuccessful ones, I can also imagine that you can apply then scoring to that in order to make sure that, people are trying to reach the successful outcome. It's close, I guess, to the gamification webinar we did a few months back. I think this really ties it together, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised you, as a gamification expert, guru, I have to say, are starting this asking this question. But yes, indeed, you can. We have the stars in Warp Studio, and your scores depending of the decisions or the outcomes you experience as a main character. So that is connected to each other. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's part 2 of the worksheet. We still have the part 3. You already mentioned that's the part where everything, let's say, comes together, where the story becomes alive. Can you walk me through the third part of the worksheet?
Yeah, so this is the brainstorm part. So you have a field for brainstorming, and then you have to pick the favorites. And then when you have done that, you go to part 3. And here you see a outline of a story. So you see how the story is structured from beginning to end. So what you now do is pick those favorites out of the brainstorm session, part 1 and 2, and you plot them into this story outline. So the first part is about the setup. As we learned, that's the first act. And that's all about introducing the needed information to this learner to play this scenario. So they want to know, who am I? Who do I play? What's my objective? What's my goal? Where am I? Those types of questions you put in the setup. Then a new field is here, and that's about the catalyst. And that's really fun way to get the story going, to have it moving forward. So a catalyst is an incident that sets the story in motion. Yep. So you can think of, maybe it's a scenario about a fire drill, evacuation training. So my first objective as the main character is, you have an appointment with a colleague, go towards that, and while walking towards this appointment, I hear a fire alarm. So the inciting incident, the catalyst, is the fire alarm, and that sets the story in motion, because now I have to make decisions, and the story gets a different turn. The other, so the catalyst is the introduction of the second act, and that's where we call it the rising action and the climax. So the rising action introduces the different challenges, obstacles you think about, and the ideal situation is that every obstacle gets a bit harder or more difficult to, more challenging to overcome. Thank you. And it builds up to the climax. And the climax is the most exciting, interesting moment of this story. It's the end game, the end boss in a video game. So it builds up to that moment. And then, of course, you could have a failed outcome or successful outcome. And with a successful outcome, you have the solution. And that's in the resolution part of the story, the third act. And then you learned, throughout this story, you learned on how to deal with these obstacles, how to deal with the climax, and therefore you learned how to deal with this whole situation in this story.
Thank you. That's really insightful on how you can, use the worksheet to create this story outline and how you can really bring this story to life. But what I'm really wondering is kind of what's the next step? So you've got the story outline here. What's the process of turning this into an actual VR training?
Yeah, so when you have done this workshop and used this worksheet, you have a perfect start to get into Warp Studio. It's just making it more easy to get started in Warp Studio. So you have the different story elements, you have a story outline, and now in Warp Studio, you can think about the details. So what questions do you ask? Which answers do you give to the learner? And what are the outcomes of these different answers that you can select? You can also think about scoring. So in much more detail, what happens within one scene? What do you see? What don't you see? Who is in that scene? What's the script? So going in much more detail. But this really kickstarts your scenario writing into Warp Studio.
Cool. So regarding kickstarting, I can imagine that a lot of the viewers out there really want to start, with the worksheet. Can you tell a little bit about the implementation? How can they start? Where can they find it?
Yeah, so we have you covered. We have an amazing URL. It's live. You go to warpvr.com/worksheet, and there you find much more information about this worksheet. You can download it. It's for free, and with a lot of examples for every different story element, but also how to facilitate this workshop. So go there. You find much more information, and good luck using this worksheet. And maybe also let us know what you think, how you use it. If you have any questions or remarks, you can always contact us through the website or our contact details, and we'll share that in the webinar.
Thank you, Danny, for this very insightful explanation on storytelling, about interactive storytelling for training in VR, and about the worksheet, how it works, and how instructional designers can, directly start using it today. We are super interested in what everybody thinks, how the worksheet is being applied. Let us know your feedback, and for any questions you might have, we're here to help. Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you. Looking forward to our next webinar.
Thank you, and bye.